Well, it seems the DA is spending a lot of time in court because today the party is challenging the Employment Equity Act at the High Court in Pretoria. The organization has argued that the legislation is discriminatory, unfair, and has a negative impact on hundreds of thousands of jobs. The DA's court challenge has sparked backlash, meanwhile, from many, including the ANC's Parliamentary Caucus. According to that caucus, this legal challenge is an attack on progress that the country has made in achieving an equitable society. Watching developments for us is SABC News reporter Samkele Maseko, who is standing by just outside court to get us a sense of how the DA is feeling, I imagine, the thinking at the very least in the lead up to this litigation. And Samkele, the DA has made their stance very clear about this. They in fact believe that this act in its current form does the opposite of what it's claimed it'll do.
Indeed, the Democratic Alliance is not particularly chuffed with this Equity Amendment Act, Employment Equity Amendment Act that was enacted in the 6th Parliament. They are saying that it's the basic introduction of race quotas, which the Constitutional Court has found to be unconstitutional within the country. But I'm going to bring in Mr. Willie Okamp. You'd have to excuse our earlier shot there. We are in the sun and Mr. Willie Okamp was having some issues with the sun. Mr. Okamp, just the essence and the nub of your case. Yesterday, the Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille said this is basically the introduction of racial quotas, which are unconstitutional within the country. What is going to be the nub of your arguments once the court case gets underway this morning at 10?
This Amendment Act will definitely not assist in letting redress happen. It gives way too much power to the minister herself, and then the minister can now go and apply racial quotas based on a geographical spread of a national proportion onto specific areas in this country. So if you look, for instance, at KwaZulu-Natal, if this act is going to be implemented, it will make it impossible for an Indian person in KwaZulu-Natal to obtain a job in a company that has got more than 50 people. Because due to the fact that a national geographic spread is going to be applied there. And the same goes for colored people, for example, in the Western Cape. There are more Indian people in KwaZulu-Natal than in other places in the country. So you can't have this blanket approach when you do this. And then we have seen over many years that the measures that the department and that the previous ministers have implemented to obtain redress did not work. In 2008, we had 5.5 million unemployed people in this country. In 2024, we had double that figure to 11.1 million people that is unemployed. So it is not working. Go and have a look at what the Democratic Alliance is doing in the Western Cape. There, the unemployment rate is much lower than anywhere else in the country because we are enabling the private sector to thrive. We are enabling the private sector to grow. And this is what should happen. This act, in its current form, will deter the private sector from growing. To give you an example, you will have a 10% of your turnover penalty imposed on you if you do not adhere to this act. Now, not 10% of profit, 10% of turnover. There are no company that will be able to go through that. And rather than using the stick situation where you threaten the private sector, rather use the carrot method by enhancing the private sector and by helping the private sector to grow. If the private sector grow, we can create jobs. It's not the job of government to create jobs. It's the job of government to create an environment that is conducive for the private sector to thrive and to create jobs. And this act is standing slap bang in the middle of that.
It is that very same private sector which still has racially demographic management and in senior positions and in junior positions at their companies where those are white, pale males, and it's not black, it's not female. How do you then change that particular scenario when they have been resisting for the past 30 years?
Redress is an ongoing project. We will not soon reach a point where we can say that redress has now been completed. It's an ongoing project that must be driven the whole time. But we cannot get to a point where we say, you are not applying that, so now we are going to punish you. The private sector still is the only sector that can really do transformation. I've never seen a black person applying for a job at a private company where that person is qualified to do the job and not being appointed. We heard Mr. Michael Bagram of the DA, who's been practicing as a labor lawyer now for 40 years, and he said in this last 40 years he has never seen that happen. So we've got to make the private sector stronger, and the private sector must take the responsibility on themselves to also assist in redress, but they will not be able to do that if they can't grow. How are we going to expect from the private sector to do this if they are going to go backwards? Let's enable them to grow and then say to them, as in the past, you put your own targets there. We'll check this. But what we've got now is a minister that will be able to enforce targets on the private sector without looking at the sector themselves, without looking at a specific business and what that business is doing, the expertise in that business, etc. And that will now lead to a point where, for example, companies that has got, let's say, 48 or 45 employees, and that company can maybe grow, they will come to themselves and say, you know what, let's not grow, because the moment that we do, we're going to go over 50 employees, and then we will have to abide by these stringent measures that a minister is going to enforce on us, and we don't want that. So it is standing in the way of economical growth, and we must not get to a point where the private sector is going to go backwards, because then job creation and redress will also go backwards.
When you look at the stats, how many, if you look at the demographic employment, the last time I checked the statistics, the Indian community, particularly within the province of KwaZulu-Natal, had the least number of people who are sitting at home as compared to the black majority. How do you then turn that situation around with saying that you are not going to implement these particular employment equity acts that has been enacted by the president?
If you want to really address redress, you must start at our education system. We cannot address the redress matter and righting the wrongs of the past, but we've got an education system that is failing and has been failing our pupils for the last 30 years. We've got to educate people from grade R right through to tertiary level, so that people will be able to walk into a job and, irrespective of his color, get the job because he is the most qualified or she is the most qualified person for that job. So that is what we've got to do. The areas in the country differs from each other. You cannot compare Durban in KwaZulu-Natal with Pretoria in Tshwane and Gauteng. You cannot. It's different demographics. So again, to have a blanket approach that you're going to apply there will not work. And then there's a big difference between setting targets and those targets being misused and then becoming racial quotas. The Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court in the past have already spoken out and made judgments against the implementation of racial quotas.
But does this not feed into the public perception that the Democratic Alliance is anti-transformation, particularly noting what the president of the ANC and of the country said, that you would have to come to him and explain, why are you so against transformation within the country?
We are not against transformation. Go and have a look at practicalities. What happened in the Western Cape? Where the DA governs, in the Western Cape, the unemployment figures are the lowest in the country. The amount of black people in middle and senior management are higher than in any other part of the country. Because there we are building an economy. We are helping the private sector to grow. This is not anti-transformation if you want to help the private sector to grow. And we are in this government of national unity not to be a rubber stamp for what the ANC want. We are here to do what we believe is in the best interest of every South African. And again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Go and have a look at what happened in the Western Cape. That is what it's about. And if you look at what has happened over the last 30 years in South Africa with these laws that we've had, it did not work. We've got the highest unemployment figure in the world. We are still one of the most unequal societies in the world. That is an accusation against the ANC's governments in the past, because they did not implement redress correctly. They thought that they're creating a lot of jobs in the sectors of government, but that's not job creation. We know that the government sectors are bloated. You've got to create jobs in the private sector. It's your small and medium enterprise businesses that can really grow jobs the best.
Not to bad for the ANC, but with the injustices of the past, you can't single-handedly point that to one political party, noting that previously black South Africans were not employed properly within the apartheid era, and there was that particular Bantu education where you got a better education than my father, and that would instantly say to you that is a systematic inherited problem from the apartheid regime.
and we've got to right those wrongs. There's no doubt that was a wrong, deplorable system, and we've got to set it right. But we cannot set it right by making the same mistakes. You cannot reverse racial injustices by now applying racial quotas. You've got to do it in a way where the economy grows. If the economy doesn't grow, we will not be able to create jobs. And if we don't create jobs, we will not be able to address the redress matter at all. So we've got to look at how we can do this by having a bottom-up situation where every South African will be able to have the opportunity to have a decent job, a fair opportunity to have a decent job. The wrongs of the past needs to be corrected, but we have seen over the last 30 years that the way in which previous ANC governments wanted to correct those wrongs did not work. And you cannot do the same thing over and over again and think you're all of a sudden now going to have a different result. We need to look at redress in a different way, where we are really empowering people, not like the previous BEE laws that empowered a small elite on the top of the ANC cadre deployment ranks.
Mr. Vileo-Ocampo, on a separate issue, negotiations for the third budget 3.0, how far are those particular deliberations? Have you started? I know the Deputy Minister of Finance, who comes from the Democratic Alliance, is also integrally involved in this new process. How far are you?
We are very glad that the Minister has at long last said that he wants to listen to what we as the other parties in the Government of National Unity are saying. So we've got Minister Asho Sarupan there. He made a lot of inputs in the past. He's doing it again, and hopefully now the Minister will look at those and listen to those, again coming back to a growing economy. It's not only matters like this in court today, but it's also our budget that must assist South Africans to have an economy that will grow, to have job creation at the forefront of it. And we believe that the budget 3.0, as you call it, will definitely be a better budget. We're not going to have this VAT increase thanks to the Democratic Alliance's court challenge on that. We will now have a budget that will not tax South Africans further. We can cut cost at various points and really get a budget that will serve the people of South Africa much better.
So this will be a budget that you will vote for this time around?
I believe so. Let's have a look at what the final budget will be and what the Minister does, because it is at the end of the day his prerogative to present the fiscal framework. I hope that this budget will be a budget that we can all fall behind and support after all things that we've gone through. I think this is also showing us that we've got a very healthy democracy, and that even with its bumps and potholes in the road, the Government of National Unity is standing strong, and we can get through this. And I believe that we will have a much better budget this time around, and that is due to the healthy debate and way of things doing within this GNU.
A GNU that you are opposing, its Employment Equity Act?
It's not the GNU's Employment Equity Act that we're opposing. It was voted through in the 6th Parliament. So it's not this Parliament that voted for it. And we're not taking on the parties or our partners within the GNU. We are challenging the constitutionality of certain aspects of this law. And we must remember that the courts, as the judicial arm of government, is also part of government. So we're making use of measures within government to make sure that the people of South Africa benefits out of everything, and that we uphold the Constitution.
In government, you inherit the good and the bad once you go into that particular government. This time around, you are inheriting this Employment Equity Act.
Yes, we are. And when you inherit the good and the bad, you must build on the good and you must change the bad. And that is what we are doing here today. We will build on everything that is good, and everything that is bad needs to be changed so that it becomes good, so that we can build on that as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vileo-Ocampo. That is Vileo-Ocampo, who is the spokesperson of the Democratic Alliance, saying that this Employment Amendment Equity Act is unconstitutional. It is racial quotas. It must be changed. And they are saying that the Constitutional Court has previously found against these particular race quotas. You remember that particular case where a member of the South African Police Service took that department of SABC to court over not being employed because another Indian person had been employed within a similar managerial position. This is going to be rather interesting on what the Department of Labour and Employment has to say about this Amendment Act of employment equity within the country. And the President has said that the DA must come to him and explain why are they so irked by transformation.